But what's happened here now is that we've parked or perhaps the semantic divide between what we call enterprise and what enterprise actually is in society has led us to misunderstand what enterprise means to us. Enterprise, and this is a bit of a spiel, so please forgive me, but enterprise is one of the most equalizing factors in social interaction. Because the richest, most powerful person cannot buy what the poorest, least or most vulnerable person doesn't want to sell in a status of equity. Unless you coerce, steal, borrow, beg, whatever. But if all things are equal, enterprise is the ultimate equalizer. Because at the point of the transaction, both parties, regardless of who they are, what they come from, what they represent, are equals across a transaction. And the value of the transaction is equalized. Because if they don't perceive value on both sides, the transaction will never take. So in some ways, enterprise is one of the most equitable social systems known to human experience. But we've ended up misunderstanding it to a point where it's been parked as somebody that manipulates, true, exploits resources beyond necessity, true, creates inequity, inequality, adverse conflicts, true. So what we need to do is reclaim enterprise as it was originally intended as a social system, which is what Yunus calls social business. It's business without any argument. It sells a good or service for profit, but then how the profit is distributed is what is under discussion. If it creates wealth concentration, makes 1 or 2% of the world become enormously rich at the cost of everybody else who can't even have a square meal a day, it's not something that's wrong with the way business is conducted. It's something wrong with the way the proceeds of the business are being distributed. This is the kind of awareness and the kind of understanding I think that poor guys like me who are now academics need to perhaps have a role in. We might not be able to tell you how to do business well, but I think this relationship, this building of the understanding, this creation of the awareness somehow has a role for people who research, who read, who exchange, and then who build and create relation linkages between us. So I think I'm very at home in a panel like this because I think there is a role for this. And I think I would like to push this role, that enterprise without development is just gathering money and concentrating it in inequitable ways. Development without enterprise is a resourceless, toothless idea that will never see the light of day. So enterprise-led development then becomes the next paradigm for human growth, development, and sustainable lifestyles. How's that for a speech, guys?
Very important what you said, the equity distribution of profits, making sure the communities that generated them have equity ownership in the profits. Profit alone, so sustainable business alone, social enterprise isn't enough. The second step is the equity of profits.
And I think I want...
Well, equitable distribution. Yeah. Triple, like often indigenous communities have the resources, companies come, and it's the main investors are the companies that really generate the wealth and keep the wealth. And that's what creates the inequity. But it's about spreading, the benefits more equally.
I just have an apprehension that social enterprises in particular, there might be an element of moral hazard here, because when it comes to the kind of money making that takes place and the ruthless kind of money making that takes place, so the capitalist model could see that now that we have a market-based solution to addressing social issues also, so it's okay to continue to be ruthless. So the social enterprise would take care of all the issues. So I inherently see a potential moral hazard here. So do you agree with that?
May I go with this first, if you don't mind? No, actually, there is another view that it eliminates the moral hazard. In what Simon Zedek calls responsible competitiveness, it's basically the principles, the morality, the human norms of society which overtake what they call the passionate pursuit of profit at all costs. If you remove the at all costs from the passionate pursuit of profit, we're probably okay. But at all costs is where the morality comes in. What price are you willing to pay? What cost are you willing to extract from a business transaction is what makes it a moral decision. But if the passionate pursuit of profits is followed without this other add-on of at all costs, but at reasonable cost, in a responsible manner, in an equitable way, in an accountable manner, in a transparent way, just by adding or subtracting the suffix, you can transform the meaning of passionate pursuit of profit. So what we are trying to perhaps discuss here and to project to some of the audience, if they're willing to listen, is that the moral hazard could be eliminated by reassessing our definition of profits. Profits per se are not bad, but how they get distributed can be good or bad. If you give it all away, it's probably considered good, right? Because it will help people. But if you give it all away too late, then it's probably not that good either, because it's not going to have any. So now if you allocate a lot of money into climate restitution, adaptation, resilience building, knowing that, that it's just not enough time left, it's still possible. But imagine doing it 20 years from now. All the world, 20,000 species being lost every 7-8 years. Never to return. Is that a cost you're willing to pay for passionate pursuit of profits today? If you are, you'll continue with doing it. But if you realize that it's probably too much of a price for me to go on expanding into explorations into extractive industries, which will create enormous ecological and irreversible ecological damage, or displace communities, or take away indigenous knowledge, or destroy architectural or heritage sites, then maybe that money will be spent well in fixing some of the profit-taking strategies that you will make, and thereby mitigating the damage you create. So I think the moral hazard is a clear and present thing as we speak now, in the way we conduct business now. But if we were to fix it through some of these enterprise models, we might be able to slow it down to a point where maybe it's never going to be completely moral. There will always be people doing bad things. But I think that we could shift this whole discussion into a more positive, into a more meaningful, and perhaps a more sustainable dialogue. Sorry, I took your time.
But so, I love the sound of that. But I'm also critical of it. So I'm going to ask Madiha and Suniya to also weigh in here, and from two lenses. One lens where we're touting out entrepreneurship to be, some really big game changer. It's going to address all our issues. It's going to save the world. There's a dozen incubators bludgeoning around the world every day. We have lots of startups. There's this, startup culture that's become a buzzword. But are we really getting things done? And is it the only way, or is there more to it?
Yeah, so I'll just add to that. That was a little too technical for me. I'm not from the development sector. I've been a hardcore corporate person, and only recently I'm from the startup world. So for me, sir, with all due respect, I think every startup or every social enterprise or every enterprise or every startup for that matter has a social impact. The way we see as problems and the way we preach to entrepreneurs also is that every problem is synonymous with an opportunity. And if you go about solving a particular problem, whether it is to do with travel, whether it is to do with hygiene, female hygiene, technology comes into play. And when technology comes into play, I love using this word, which is my most favorite, which is disruption. When you disrupt something, that doesn't mean that you create a rocket science technology. It just means that you make sure that your end users benefit out of it. It's affordable, it's convenient, and it reaches to the masses. So yes, coming back to your point or your question, if social entrepreneurs or startups per se are making that impact, yes, they are. So, for example, I'll quote two examples here. One is from the corporate setting, where at one point in time we used to take these initiatives under the umbrella of CSR. However, we've gotten this goal that we need to monetize it or to sustain it also. And the other I'd like to quote from the startup world. So there's this fantastic a pair of a couple of ladies who started this venture in health a few years back. And the business model is not in itself sustaining. However, the way they're addressing the problem of awareness, of health, of treatment, of making sure that all resources that were latent at that point in time, that weren't being used, are made use of under this particular system. I'm sure that everybody have heard, or the ones who are well versed with the startup culture in Pakistan. I'm talking about Sehat Kahani. They're making fantastic progress when it comes to capturing their target audience, and then about collaborating with the right kind of players. So they reached out to us. Like I had the digital accelerator out of Telenor, Pakistan. And of course, if everything goes well, we'd love to collaborate, because our asset, which is our subscriber base, we'd love to open that to somebody who's looking forward to making that change. So I feel that although our startup culture is very nascent, it's only 10 years old, but it is in the right direction. The government is there to support us. This fantastic initiative started by the prior government. The national incubation centers were set up throughout nationwide. And this huge revolution of entrepreneurship or startup culture evolved after that. Lots of people are changing their careers. Even when I'm talking about being in the corporate sector, they are leaving their comfortable jobs and starting their own startup. Again, these around social problems. So it's happening. The change could be slow, but it is in the right direction. And then again, I'd like to quote another example, which is of Easy Paisa, and everybody is, I'm sure, familiar what the financial services offering is. Again, it comes back to disruption. So whether it is a social initiative starting out of a corporate or an enterprise outside, I feel that all businesses or all enterprises, they do have a social impact in one way or the other. And then again, since we are so interconnected, like we all started, not alone with the bodies, like I loved how ma'am said earlier that your systems change is always evolving and it is dynamic and it is responding to the overall ecosystem. So it is a journey, and technology is a very big part of it. And it is because of technology that we can actually mass scale and make that kind of change.
Suniya, what do you think about this? So we've talked about this between us too, that yes, we have this entrepreneurship, enterprise, big buzzwords around it, lots of excitement. Is that it?
So no, I think it'll be unfair to say that it is just it. But social enterprise, we believe, can be one of the many, many market actors that are addressing a single problem. I'll give you an example here. For example, Balochistan, in comparison to all other provinces, is fairly underdeveloped. It has various bottlenecks, institutional, agency, input side way, and there are various other bottlenecks, constraints that are present within the Balochistan market. So we had a vendor, Baloch Hamza, and he wanted to export dates to UAE, but he did not have the means, financial or human resource, to actually get that done. So a couple of market players, they jumped in. They actually brought in women, and bringing in women to work in a culture and society like Balochistan is very hard to do. And Baloch Hamza, who was the vendor himself, he actually brought in his own wife and daughters from his home, brought them in the factory, in the manufacturing process, which actually encouraged other women to work. So by doing this, you not only address one particular constraint of exporting the dates, but you're also adding into various other market actors, such as bringing in women, addressing the constraint of gender inequality, resource distribution, institutional bottlenecks. Because when they did start exporting it, the government actually subsidized a lot of things for them. Another example for this would be silage. For those who don't know what silage is a nutritional fodder for livestock. So it is very important to use different initiatives to scale up. We started with 60 kg bales of silage from South Punjab in 2014. And today in 2018, it has scaled up to Gilgit-Baltistan, Skardu, and even now we've even started working with female-only led silage entrepreneurs. So it is again important to look at social enterprise as not just the sole market actor which can inculcate change, but looking at various other market actors that can support and facilitate a social enterprise in working efficiently and sustainability.
So, I think Favad, do you want to add to this? Because Engro is thinking about exactly this nowadays.
But before that, I just want to bring something that I had a pleasure of attending Social Enterprise World Forum a couple of months back in Edinburgh. There was conversations precisely on this point. I just want to bring that here. So there was a conversation about whether social enterprises, how relevant they are to today's world, and if they are really making a dent. So there was one very interesting speaker, you might know, Indy Johar from Dark Matter Labs. So he said that that we are not actually. So according to him, that most of social enterprises and the ideas are mostly around incremental things. So while we are busy, manufacturing ethical chocolate bars, the world is changing fundamentally. The trillions of dollars are going into artificial intelligence, and none of that money is coming from necessarily from with a social consciousness. So it's purely in pursuit of re-engineering the world and then making money. So the conversations in social enterprise forums are good, but they are not good enough to actually have a sizable impact on the future that is shaping up right now. And I kind of found that difficult to argue with. I mean, I think it's very strong. I mean, while it's extremely important that and technology, yeah. While it is extremely important that we interact, the kind of Telenor Velocity as a program which intuitively brings all these multiple stakeholders together at one place and makes them co-design and co-produce and solve some of these pressing issues. And while MDF's great work, particularly silage, huge fan because we are also in this space. All of these are they solve problems, yes. But the question really is if social enterprise as a movement, and that's perhaps we need to ask ourselves also if it is sizable enough, if it is impactful enough, if it is in the right corridors, where this consciousness is actually there or not.
Please, this was my question and Fawad asked it.
The whole idea here is not to have social enterprise or its derivatives transform, take over and substitute what's been going on in the world. It's just an alternative that will give people choices. That's how we look at social enterprise. This is not here to transform the world in a way that it will replace, supplant, substitute what we know so well as enterprise, free enterprise. But it will give an alternative to people who still wish to engage. Right now, we have only one way of doing business. We need other ways of doing business. Why? Because the world is transforming very quickly. And one of the ways you respond to rapid and runaway transformation is by creating more and more alternatives on the menu. So in a way, this is also, heuristically speaking, this is also a very logical corollary to the transformation that we see in the world. I hope that's not very technical. But the idea is that technology itself does not necessarily have to be useful if it's a disruptive technology. Technologies per se are efficiency drivers, access creators, and opportunity builders.
And enablers.
So, sorry?
And enablers.
It
It is an enabler.
Enabler is an opportunity builder also. I agree. So we'll add enabler to this list as well. So technology itself, perhaps, has no face value. The use of technology has face value. So in a way, I constantly keep saying that technology, if it creates access, enables, builds opportunities, and drives efficiencies, then that's the way to go. But there are certain other examples where, for instance, this might actually be counterintuitive. I'll give you the example of the football industry. When Sialkot chose to continue with building hand-stitched footballs, they were trying to defy technology, and they resisted too long. Meanwhile, there were competitors coming all over the world who were creating machines who would create footballs. So from 95% of the world's match balls in play, Pakistan is now down to about 45, 50. Why? Because they thought that technology is not important. And technology is important. And their argument is very strong. They said, well, if we put machines in place of people, 40, 50,000 families will suddenly go out of livelihood. So, whereas their motive was quite noble, but they quite completely ignored that there's an overtaking paradigm happening, which will keep, in any way, leave these guys out of a job. So rather than retraining those 40 people in good time, building in a machine-friendly soccer industry in the 90s, they were left until the mid-2010s to now scratch their head and say, oh shucks, the industry's gone. Similar things are happening. So technology, on the other hand, if it's misunderstood, can become an impediment to your transformation.
Absolutely. If I could just add, this is very interesting. So we judge also startups with different ideas, mostly are around problems, social problems. So this is one of the questions that we ask is how do you plan to scale it? It's a fantastic idea. So if it is not, the service is not reaching, I don't know, 100,000, 200,000, at least 1 million customers, how do you plan to go about doing it? And one of the fantastic examples that I love to quote on forums like this is, I'm sure that you must have heard what they follow, M-Pesa in Kenya. So that was the first, earlier Aarti, the word Aarti was used. So again, battling these issues where technology is brought in to make systems so transparent or transactions so transparent. Now the entire economy, in the sense that the school fees are paid using the mobile account, or I don't know, the drivers are paid using the mobile account. So it is more to do, rather than bringing technology in, that it is to do with the cultural change also. Initially, I recall when I was in part of Easy Paisa some 8 years ago, it was very difficult for us to bring that kind of change, because it was difficult for us to change people's behaviors, how to go about using transitioning from traditional banking accounts to mobile accounts. But yes, I'd love to put in technology because it's just a facilitator. It makes sure that is where disruption and all these changes come into play.
So, Maryam, I'm going to do your job, and I have a question on this. So where do you see? I mean, these great ideas are they being backed up by money, the real money? I mean, in terms of there's this, the youth particularly has this, great sense of agency, which is brilliant because, I have at least gotten, skeptical with age. So there is a, great hope. But is there, I mean, technology, we understand it, it is enabler also, it could, disrupt things. But is there money really backing up these ideas in the sense that we are talking about? Because I had a little bit experience of looking for, impact investment for one or two ideas, and particularly in Pakistan, it's not easy at all to reach out to potential investors and actually have and be able to close a deal.
So bringing about change is never too easy, right? But then again, the answer to your question is yes. Of course, it is difficult, but there are people who invest. Like I was on a forum earlier. It wasn't a social venture, but then again, there were some international partners who had invested some good amount of $1.5 million into this particular platform. I'd like to quote, there was this fantastic director who's doing really well corporate-wise. He's climbing the corporate ladder. He had everything. One fine day, he decided to quit his job and he started his own startup. Of course, like this, that was around having this fantastic platform for farmers where there is no RT system, there is microloans available. In addition to that, he made sure that his service has information for farmers so that they can make good decisions. Fantastic farming product, it's doing really well. And it has been raising investment throughout. So recently, if I'm not wrong, he raised around $1.85 million. It's not easy, I agree. But then again, if your question is specific to the Pakistani investor market, so no, there aren't many. But yes, there are lots of investors, and correct me, Maryam, if I'm wrong, there are lots of investors worldwide who are willing to put in money. So again, like I talked about earlier, they're Chinese investors. They're willing to put in money.
Not just, I mean, we now have investors from the Middle East,
Yes.
from East Asia, from the US. In fact, the first big VC fund just launched about a month ago, $30 million, Sarmayakar Ventures.
Samayakar Ventures, yes.
So, yeah, the money is coming in now.
Money is coming in. Then again, it all depends, you know, the idea, and of course, it has to be, again, sad news is, but when you talk about scale, because we're talking about systems change and it has to be, I feel it's synonymous to scale. Scale is synonymous to disruption. So it has to be backed by technology.
It's more news that it is inspiring to tell you when there's money and then there's not money.
Yeah, we're just going to talk about that and throw a couple of things out, food for thought. And one, size is relative, like we say, 30 million. Well, in financial markets, 30 million for the kinds of transactions I used to do when I was in capital markets is rounding error. It's nothing. It's very small. And actually, Dawn has had a number of articles the past 2 weeks on the depth of the VC market in Pakistan not being there. And unfortunately, the current investment environment, investors just aren't willing, foreign investors. So most of it really has to be done with local financing right now because of the risk profile of the Pakistani market right now. But that being said, money, currency, and how you think about it is not the only way to do business. Right now, cryptocurrencies and blockchains are fundamentally changing the way you do business, and particularly within social impact. And it's about creating alternatives. It's no longer about money anymore with this. You're creating other forms of non-money money that are driven by social impact.
So imagine that, the multiplier. And that's what technology.
So, and they're right, if you keep watching this space, there's where we see that potential for big time systems change. And so before we wrap up and open it up to the audience for any questions you guys might have, I want each of the panelists to maybe give one example of social enterprises or interventions that they see or they have been involved in that has actually created systems change.
That's a difficult one because social enterprises I've seen closely, either they failed or they are in early stages. And so,
or even interventions, like I think the milk collector model.
So
is systems change.
I'll very quickly talk about the social enterprise that we are trying to incubate. And although we had our own path of reaching to that conclusion, but we later found out that there is actually a terminology out there. It's called corporate impact venturing. So it's such a fancy term where corporates, go on creating impactful ventures. So we're basically right now working with a local Pakistani investor, interestingly, and a foreign development bank who have shown faith in our venture. And it's technologically it's not very different from it's basically producing silage, particularly 60 kg, which is suitable for the smallholder farmers. The real I think innovation is in the distribution model because we have set certain non-negotiable targets for ourselves to sell particular product to smallholder farmers in shortage months, and then in the process we would create that impact of farmers being able to produce more milk and of course sell it to our milk processing business preferably, although it's not tied with that. So we're really looking forward to creating having this impact, particularly in the milk production activity of smallholder farmers. I don't know if it answered your question.
Well, there are examples of high-tech stuff. I was just talking about this example of the cryptocurrency. We just raised $200 million from Middle Eastern investors to create the model, and they're working with Ethereum to actually link it into the system. That's one example of technology. But I'd like to, since we're giving examples, give you a very low-tech example. This is an example that comes from, unsexy things like women's education. The Grameen Nursing College in Bogura, in Bangladesh, has a very interesting model. It's a social enterprise that's transformed lives, not only the financial space. The telecom, the Grameen phone, by the way, in Bangladesh is Telenor. And there is a thing called the Grameen Telecom Foundation. So the profits from the Telenor operations, the shares held by the Grameen Foundation, Yunus Social Ventures, go into creating a fund for helping people, creating social enterprise. 2,000 social entrepreneurs every month are funded through this, and it's expanding. What they do is they give out a loan to qualified young women from disadvantaged communities to learn to become nurses. So they don't, all they have to do is get the grades. They're screened, they're taken to the Grameen Caledonian Nursing College. The fee is paid by the foundation. The bursaries come out of the foundation. But in their second or third year of studies, because there are 300 graduates every year, every one of those girls has a job. Because they are being trained to General Medical Council or General Nursing Council's UK standards. So they have jobs in the Middle East, they have jobs in the private sector. Everybody graduates with a job which is relatively good paying. And the job provider has already written up a note saying, we'll pay back the foundation the cost of the scholarship. So the girl actually spends not a single cent on her education. It's just her capability that gets her through the system. And one payor pays the next. And they churn 300 nurses out a year. And there are so many jobs for nurses, as you know. It's a very, very rare market. And this is a model I'd like to see in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, in Sri Lanka, in Nepal, because that's how you pull women out into high value, very, very impactful jobs, and you transform completely lives of some very disadvantaged communities. And guess who becomes a nurse in Pakistan? Not your average grammar school educated girl. These are girls who would otherwise have absolutely no chance for professional life. They'll probably get married at 15 to somebody who will never really realize the potential in her. So imagine, it's only 300 people at a time. It's not huge. And medical or nursing education cannot be scaled to millions. It's a very, painstaking, methodical way. But that was my favorite example of how even small money can come back, but with every cycle, create a systems impact.
I've been working at the nexus of renewable energy in agribusiness in developing countries all over the world, in over 80 countries. So I can think of many examples, but I will choose to go with a local example that also happens to be a favorite example and the one that's closest to my heart. And a little bit of personal history here too. 30 years ago, I lived with the Kalash, and I came back 30 years later to give them, replace diesel gensets, which are very harmful for their health, with microhydro electricity. And this project was done with AKRSB and won the Ashton Award. It's become a model for renewable energy all over the world, where the communities raised 20% of the financing themselves, where the widows even sold their jewelry, the village drunk drank one last bottle, that kind of thing, and where we actually monetized the labor that they put in, and it was completely built and operated. We built 103 microhydels, and now it's much more. And then we built, with money from GIZ, productive uses of renewable energy component on that, where women now, because they have electricity, are building on all kinds of businesses on top of that to generate incomes for their family. One example in Rizal is it's very cold in the winter. They didn't have hot water to bathe or for washing clothes, so they built with using the electricity bathing and washing house. The woman charges, I believe, 60 rupees is what it's up to now, and you can go have a bath, you can wash clothes. Women's lives and the health impacts have changed completely. Kids can study at night. There's fruit processing businesses. Women are selling their embroidery. There's dairy businesses that have come out of that. And in terms of financing, it was also very unique because they mitigated greenhouse gas emissions by replacing diesel gensets that are very polluting with hydro. So we actually sold the carbon credits forward before they were actually generated and monetized them and took a loan from the Acumen Fund and sold it to investors to create the financing gap against the carbon credits. And it's completely changed the lives in the region, and it's been very heartening for me to see it's now developing into microgrids and utilities that are run by the communities, and they decide themselves how you charge, whether by light bulb, whether by number of appliances and type of appliances or usage, and you can really see the change in people's lives. Everyone talks about change, but I think even to bring real change in one person's life, if you're even able to do that in your lifetime, you've done a lot. It's very hard to do. And yet, this whole new business model has taken off with these communities. So that's my favorite example.
Thank you. Suniya, do you want to share one? So I'll build up on the silage example. Silage is one of our best case studies, business cases that we've developed at Market Development Facility. So you already know we made 60 kg bales that were good for smallholding farmers with about 5 to 7 animals. It started in 2014 with an MOU with Pioneer Seeds. It was scaled up in 2015, where the production and distribution of 60 kg silage bales was initiated in the southern Punjab. This was further scaled up in 2016 when we went into Sindh, and where, other than the production and distribution of silage bales, we also initiated machinery rental models. Then in 2016, we scaled it up to KPK, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, where we initiated the same model of 60 kg silage bales and rental machinery models. In 2017, we scaled and replicated the same model in Azad Kashmir. And other than the 60 kg bales, the rental model, we also introduced procurement of silage maize from other provinces, because Azad Kashmir at that moment had weaker market linkages with this regard. In 2017 and 2018, we've scaled it up to include female silage entrepreneurs. So this is an example that tells you how, based on regions and different specific contexts, you devise an intervention to include all market actors, to include all regional players that may or may not be stakeholders, that may or may not have an impact, but you include them so that in their own particular ways they can contribute to a particular intervention. And it is very important throughout these 6 years of interventions and scaling up and replicating the silage model. In every area, in every region, we began with an initial baseline and we monitored it on a monthly basis from its initiation to the time that a model was matured. And it is very important to do that even in terms of a social enterprise, not just a particular social intervention, But it is important to measure the impact throughout the life cycle so that you can actually understand that the extent of the target beneficiaries that you intend are actually coming out of it, rather than we're not just talking about, hoity-toity stuff here and there.
Well, yeah, I quoted lots of examples, but then again, probably very briefly. So I'd like to talk about again from this fantastic project that we've been involved with, the government and other donor organizations also. We started this initiative a couple of years back called Khushal Zamindar. So we sell services. We do not sell, but then again, the farmers subscribe to our digital products where they can make smart decisions. For example, with regards to weather, with regards to what kind of pesticides they should use, and with regards to certain consulting arrangements. I flaunt this example because this is a fantastic showcase of industry-academia linkages, and by that we mean when we say we provide agricultural consulting, so we've taken certain professors on board from the agricultural universities and we connect them to farmers, because earlier what we observed was happening that these farmers have this particular community of their own and they're exchanging information, how to use, what to use, when not to use. So we thought of why not we bring research right to the field. So this particular initiative has been launched in the north, GB area, then Punjab, and now we are launching in Sindh also. Then again, the kind of delta or the incremental value is huge, and the subscriber base, like I told you earlier, is around 5 million. So 5 million monthly active users that we have up to now.
Thank you. That's amazing. Thank you all for these wonderful examples.